Tyler, my first question in the field of writing and you teaching writing, I wanted to ask within storytelling, where do you believe critical thinking is the most important?
Mm. Well, I think that the biggest problem with most thinking as well as with most stories and most writing is a lack of focus on one singular idea.
Mhm.
So I would say whether you are writing an essay, a lot of my videos are more like video essay format. And so whether I'm writing a screenplay or whether I'm writing a YouTube video, there is a one singular central idea. When you are writing something like an essay, you're going to have a thesis statement and you're going to be saying, okay, I'm making an argument for this, right? I'm saying that, you know, economic conditions in this country are great for this reason, right? And then you have supporting points that will back up the argument that you're making in an essay. Storytelling is the same. The difference is that you are making a thematic or philosophical argument rather than an argument of a different kind that you might be making in an essay.
Okay.
And so a lot of times when someone is coming into writing a story, they are coming into that story with all of these ideas that are not focused yet. They're not focused around a particular theme. They are thinking about a concept or a cool scene idea that they have, or how the music might play into the story, rather than starting from a place of what is the story about on a thematic level? What argument am I making through the conflict that's going to be taking place in the story? And how is that going to progress? And so I think a lot of my channel, I talk about fixing story problems, and the way that you fix story problems are by critically thinking about what first and foremost the story is supposed to be about. What are you saying? Is this more than just a piece of entertainment? Ideally it is, because we don't actually connect with something solely because of entertainment. We connect with something because it has some sort of statement that it's making, right? So you can see movies that are enjoyable, like a roller, they are like a roller coaster in the sense that
Yeah.
they are fun, they can be enjoyable, but then you do not look back on them as your favorite movie of all time, right? I think a
Exactly.
lot of the reason that people remember certain films as stories that really stuck out to them is because they had some sort of thematic argument to make. So when you're thinking critically, you want to be focusing your story around that thematic argument and taking away the things that are not part of that argument
Mhm.
and adding elements that will support the conflict and the argument that you are ultimately trying to make.
Got it. Awesome. Next, I want to ask you about interdisciplinary learning, which,
Mhm.
just to give you a definition on that, is taking knowledge and information from different fields and incorporating into writing in general. So I was just wondering, just kind of an interesting question. Are there any fields you feel that are kind of unusual or unexpected you take influence from that you use for writing or teaching writing?
Hmm. That's a good question. It's funny that you mention interdisciplinary specifically, because my degree is technically an interdisciplinary studies degree,
Oh,
which,
wow.
yeah, which is what essentially that means is I did not actually graduate with a major. I graduated with 3 minors because I
Mhm.
left the film school section of my college and then essentially built my own sort of class list and went from there. And the classes, the 3 minors that I have are film, media writing, and business. So in regards to storytelling or writing specifically, I think that the most important things that you can be focusing on there are philosophy, psychology, um, you know, other elements of writing like nonfiction writing, like I was talking about. Writing an essay and being clear in the point of an essay is similar to writing a story and being clear in the point of the story. But I think that the biggest thing for me has been understanding um, the business side of YouTube as well as filmmaking, so that as I have progressed, I'm not just focused on being a screenwriter. I also have been focused on looking at what the core problems are in the film industry at large, especially within the development process, and then saying, okay, how do you fix those problems from a business standpoint so that the writing is better, right? So that,
Got
and
it.
ultimately so that the film that you produce can make more money because it's more philosophically resonative to more people, which then makes them want to share it with their friends, and more people watch it, more people return to it, and maybe, you know, buy the DVD or stream it on Netflix, something like this. So I think personally, I've been very interested in business, and I think I'm a very analytical person in the sense that I view things from a problem solution sort of framework versus solely a storytelling framework or something
Got
like
it.
this, where if you are not solving a problem, then what you are saying or what you are pushing forward is, in my view, usually less valuable. So even from a story perspective, the reason that you might actually build a story with a thematic argument, that is solving a problem. What is that problem that you're solving? You're saying there is something in the world right now that I believe people need, you know, an essence of how life works or an essence of how life should be, something like this. And I want to bring that forward so that culturally I can live in a better world, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that is thinking about story from a business standpoint as well as from an artistic standpoint at the same time, because you can spend all of your time just making stories to be roller coasters, right? To make a fun thriller or a fun horror movie or a fun Western, something like this. But those are not the stories that people look back on and say, this was fundamentally altering to how we view society, or this was of benefit to society in some way.
Got it.
And so I think that there are definitely some TV shows and films that you could point to and say, this was culturally resonative for a reason that was bigger than just it was entertaining. And I think a lot of the industry has focused very heavily on the entertaining aspects of storytelling, which is why you see a heavier emphasis on production, why you see a heavier emphasis on CG or CGI and effects and these sorts of things, and less of an emphasis on a strong story with a strong thematic argument, because the focus has been on, okay, how do we entertain people first and foremost, rather than saying, okay, how do we bring something to someone that will actually enhance their life in some way, right? So it's like you listen to a philosopher, you listen to a thinker, you listen to somebody that you would consider a mentor of yours, because they are giving you something that you believe is of benefit to your life, whether that is philosophic or whether that is in another way, right? Whether it's like a, you know, you listen to a gym mentor to make you stronger or more
Yeah.
fit. You would listen to a thinker to help you think better, to help you build a stronger life for yourself. I think entertainment and film can be entertainment, and it should be entertaining, because if it's
Yeah.
boring, nobody's going to watch it at all. But at the same time, I believe in this extra level of ultimately what stories do, and the reason that they exist as a part of our human consciousness at all is because they show us an example of how to live life, or how someone else has lived life, and lessons that we can glean from that example. And so that, if you take this sort of problem and solution view, you can even apply that problem solution business point of view to philosophy and storytelling and back again to, in my view, make better stories.
Mm. That's a really good answer. Just a little kind of background. I want to be in the film industry, a writer, but right now I'm pursuing business because I said, okay, I want to be a writer, but I have to understand the business if I'm gonna be successful in there. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that connection between, I've always wondered what's the business connection and like the business purpose of stories. And the fact that you said you're providing people with this deeper thought process on a topic about
Mm-hmm.
current day, I never thought about it that way, and that's amazing.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think the most important story is like the hero's journey story, right? You see this in all sorts of cultures and societies, and the basic hero's journey is a person um, has a large desire, and then they go after that desire, encountering larger and larger obstacles that are forcing them to grow as a person and ultimately become strong enough, and wise enough and powerful enough to handle the obstacles in front of them so that they can, save the fair maiden or save the village or save the world or whatever. And I think that is not just an entertaining idea. It seems so simple, but ultimately that is the core story that we have to repeat so that we continue to remember what our value is. I think especially as men, right, is that
Yeah.
you exist not only to just exist, you also exist to enhance yourself and to grow. And the way that you grow and enhance yourself is by encountering difficult, frustrating problems that you cannot immediately see a way through, right? And so then it forces you to grow and become somebody that can see the way through those problems. And the only way that you do that is by encountering them. And I think that's the core message that a strong, let's say, basic hero's journey story can give, is to say, there are massive problems in front of you that you are not yet equipped to handle, but the only way that you equip yourself to handle those problems is to face them and figure it out as you go, because there is no way to talk and think yourself into a better frame. You must go through the events themselves. You must go through
Yeah.
difficult choices. You must go through difficult problems and ultimately realize how you can be of benefit. And I think that making stories that look at that in a lot of different ways is very important for society at large, because you can give people even fictional examples of how to be strong or how to solve the problems in front of them or how to build themselves into somebody that can be strong and can lead.
Yeah.
And I think that's the core lesson of a hero's journey. And there's a lot of different examples of how that might look, but that is ultimately what you're supposed to take away. And there's a
Yeah.
million ways that you can write stories, and there's a million different themes and thematic arguments that you can make. But I think there's a reason that we see this clear hero's journey type story repeated again and again and again and again, because ultimately we know that we must encounter obstacles to get what we want and also evolve into the person that is able to handle those obstacles and is able to get that final result.
Got it. Kind of branching off of that and going a little bit out or in the list, but you brought up how you're talking about there's this basic hero's journey, and
Mm-hmm.
that there's a lot of different themes and thematic issues you can put on top of that. As in relation, I just kind of want to get a clear picture on this. One of the foundations in our honor society is creativity. And one of the problems that kind of plagues new writers, I've talked to my friends always about this, is originality. So where do you find creativity when everything has already been done?
I think there's a couple pieces to this. So
Mhm.
one, I think that when writers focus so heavily on being original, what they end up doing is overcomplicating writing and story and all of this stuff for themselves. And so then they never actually give themselves the practice to get good at the fundamental skill set
Got it.
before trying to be original, quote unquote, right? So what happens is you say, oh, I need to make this time travel story where all this stuff happens. I need to have 16 protagonists. I need to tell everything in flashbacks. I need to, I need to be the next Christopher Nolan and write the next Memento and these sort of things. And you never get the basic fundamentals of, okay, how do you actually create a philosophical dilemma,
Mhm.
place that onto characters, and then build a plot out of that, even in a simple way, right?
Yeah.
I think that writers should avoid originality completely until they have a very clear understanding of what it is they're actually doing, right? So what I mean by that is I think it would be of extreme benefit to new writers to spend their first, let's say, 5 screenplays on very simple, easy ideas that are unoriginal, let's say, so that they can actually get the skill set side of writing first. From there, ideally, once you have gone through this process and you have an understanding of how writing works and what makes a thematic argument strong and how to actually build a thematic argument at all, then you can say, okay, I'm a writer, I exist in the world, I'm observing life, I'm involved in my culture. What are the things that people do not see or are incorrect about? Or what are the struggles in my life that have shown me my own flaws? And how do I then build that into a thematic argument that is going to be original to people, right? I think chasing originality is not the focus. I think the focus is doing it correctly, right?
Okay.
Because there is my view is that there is absolutely 100% an objective, there is an objective element to storytelling in the same way that there would be an objective element to a painting, right? In the sense that there are certain forms and rules and skills that you must learn to do the thing correctly so that you can then bring a message forward. So, and I think that what happens is, so let's use the painting analogy here.
Okay.
If you wanted to be a painter, right? And you said, okay, I want to make the most original painting ever. You could make all sorts of different stuff and try to do abstract work here and abstract work there and try to make this and blah, 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 and try to do things that nobody's ever seen before. But what you're going to end up with is a lot of garbage. What would be a better method, in my view, would to initially say, okay, with painting, how do I understand how to use color in an effective or correct way? How do I use perspective? How do I use light? How do I use shading? How do I use texture, right? These elements of building the thing. Over time, and over the study of different painters and the study of different artists in your field, you start to understand that there's this element above the basic skill set where writers have a view, or excuse me, painters have a view on life that is then being expressed through the paintings that they are painting. And then I think that a lot of time you find that view not by starting off and saying, I need to be super original. You find that view by immersing yourself in the skill set. You find that view by spending all of your time understanding color and light and form and texture and perspective. And then over time, you start to really understand what it is these painters you are studying were doing and what they were trying to express more clearly. And that then allows you to say, okay, now I can actually present my own specific view to the world, because now I've studied people that have come before and I've worked on building a skill set so that I can essentially paint whatever it is I want to paint. I can paint that at will, right?
Okay.
So you get past the skill set so that you can then actually start to philosophize and actually say, okay, I'm going to paint this moment in time in this particular room because it's giving off this particular energy or this particular, feeling, and I'm going to capture that in this painting. Now I can focus on capturing that image or that feeling or that theme, let's say, because I don't have to focus on whether or not I'm getting the perspective correct or the lighting correct, because I've already done that. I'm doing that effortlessly because I focused on that first. So I think when writers are spending so much time being like, I need to be so original, what happens is they end up writing 20 pages of their first screenplay and then that's it. They never finish anything. And so they put the cart before the horse. They put this, let me be the next Socrates in film before, okay, let me just get what needs to be happening, right? How to actually have this flow. And so one of the things that I have found extremely beneficial to my own writing is, I'm a script consultant and this sort of thing. I work with people one-on-one and I fix their screenplays. And I have worked with people at a variety of different genres, a variety of different topics, philosophical arguments, and what I have found is that like I'm able to identify what's not working, that and that allows us to then get the point across that the writer is trying to get across, right? So we get a clarification of, okay, what is your actual vision for the story, right? What is it you are trying to say? Now let's problem solve to get there, right? You have a story that's
Got
not
it.
working thematically, your characters are weak, your structure's all over the place. Let's get this thing in the beginning first. Let's get, what is your theme? Because then we can say, okay, are we building a Lamborghini or are we building a rocket ship, right? Now that we know if we're building a Lamborghini or a rocket ship, we can then solve problems to build that thing. But if we're just sort of moving pieces around, we're just going to end up with this hodgepodge of a machine that doesn't actually function because the goal has not been found.
Okay. That was amazing. Wow. Let's see. Next question. Let me see an interesting one. Another thing. So you as a writer and a teacher of writing, when I first found you, I always wanted to be a writer, but I was kind of lost because I felt like no one was really giving me what I needed. And when I found you, it was a really inspirational moment because I'm like, wow, he's teaching how it's done in the core of it. But the thing I want to ask you, and it has to do with appreciating diverse perspectives. I know lots of people watch your videos and say this is complete hogwash, or say no, that's not how you do it. So how do you deal, or how do you, you know, hear those opinions, and how do you interact with those people, and maybe do you learn anything from them, like yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of different ways to tell a story, right? And like not every story is the story of a hero's journey, let's say. Um, there's a lot of different ways that can be done. And so it's just kind of like saying, if to continue with the painting analogy, right? You could make the argument that I am um, teaching people how to paint, and then how to paint maybe in a particular way, right? And then what they then do with that, right? Whether they want to follow how I view things to a complete T, great. And they will, of course, add, because they're the one writing it, it's going to be different every time, right? Like I have a pretty similar process that I work with clients on, but every screenplay that goes through that process is a different screenplay entirely, because it is written by a different person. So even though they are following the structures and the views on story and laying out a thematic argument in the way that I have found to be most helpful for me, they are still coming out with their own story at the end of the day. And so those people are the ones that I have focused on helping the most, because
Okay.
I can't help somebody if they completely disagree with me on story. And I'm not trying to, right? Like if, let's say you thought I was more, I taught like realism, like painting realism, right? So, and then, but you wanted to paint more impressionistically,
Yeah.
or you wanted to paint more abstract, right? Then there may be things from me that you could glean as helpful. And then you might say, okay, this is helpful. And then I'm going to go and find a different teacher, or I'm going to go find someone else that can also help me in this other field. And so I think that for a lot of the time, I would say a few years ago, I was very, very interested in the thoughts and opinions of people that disagreed with my views on storytelling, in the sense of saying like, oh, a story doesn't need to be structured this way, or a story doesn't have to have a clear theme, or your protagonist does not have to operate in this particular way. But over time, I have listened to those voices less. And not that I don't listen to criticism, but what I'm saying is that there is a certain point where we just are not in the same world on how we're viewing a story. So because my number one fundamental belief in a story is that your story should thematically say something. It should be of value outside of just being entertaining. And that value that comes out of it is by you making some sort of philosophical or thematic argument and saying, this is how I believe life should operate, or this is how life does operate, or this is a battle of different viewpoints that are existing in life right now. And this is the one that I have went out in my story, and that creates a cathartic feeling in my audience, et cetera, et cetera. If you do not agree with me that a story should be thematically based, then we don't really have too much to discuss, because while you may have interesting ideas for the types of stories that you were trying to create, it's not the kind of story world that I'm trying to exist within, right? And so because of that, I have spent my time in discussion with some people that disagree with how I view story less and less. And also what I have found is a lot of the time, this is, I would say, even the bigger piece, is that a lot of the time when I have entered into discussion with people that disagree with me, a lot of the time it's me presenting, okay, here's kind of how I view it. And then they come in and they poke holes, but they don't have any sort of other system to say, or other view to say, here's actually how it works, right? So they don't present a full counter argument. They only present rebuttals to what I'm saying. And that's fine for them, but it doesn't give any value to me, because if you don't actually say, no, it's not this, it is this, then there's nothing for me to learn, right? You're not giving me anything to learn. You're only saying, well, I think that stories don't have to be that focused. It's like, okay,
So what a story.
so what do you think, right? There is, I don't know. Okay, well, if that's the case, fine. You don't have to follow what I'm saying, but that is not of value to me to continue to engage.
Okay. Good point. Good point. Let's see. So in the vein of effective communication, how do you see yourself using effective communication in both writing but also teaching it?
Good question. So working with people one-on-one as well as making YouTube videos has been extremely beneficial for my own writing, because if you cannot explain an idea in a clear, concise way, then you don't understand it, right? And so forcing yourself to walk through an idea to someone always is going to deepen your understanding. And so, even when I'm re-going over characters for the umpteenth time with somebody when we're working one-on-one, that's still valuable to me, because we're dealing with their particular story and their particular situation, and saying, okay, what specifically do you have that is or is not working, and what is your goal? And I'm coming in and I'm saying, okay, well, let's adjust it this way, in a way that is always going to be unique to them, right? Because their story is going to be different from other stories that I've worked on. And so I would say that, plus with YouTube, with a lot of the books that are out there, some of the leading screenwriting books, I've read most of them. I don't think I've read every single screenwriting book, but I've read a lot of them. And one of the things that frustrated me about a lot of them was that there can be some impractical views on storytelling, in the sense that sometimes you're getting so heavy into analysis or story theory, where you're beginning to disconnect from the writer sitting at his desk struggling because he's on page 12 of his story and nothing makes sense anymore, right? And so my focus with my channel and also with my website, Practical Screenwriting, has been to do that, is try to say, okay, look, you're sitting there and you're on page 12 and it just doesn't work. Okay, what do you do, right? How do we get to the end, right? And so this has kind of been my thing, where the first thing that I was doing on YouTube or on my website specifically was helping people get to the end of their draft. Because what I found was that people were not struggling to read more books on story theory. They were struggling to actually get 100 pages of a screenplay down, right? At all. And then from there, the next step is now you are struggling to identify what isn't working, because you have this big old mess, but you don't actually know how to organize the problems in it so that you're fixing the right problems in the right order, right?
Okay.
And so this has all come into me getting clearer and clearer and clearer and clearer on how I'm viewing story, so that I can also explain it to people on YouTube and this sort of thing. And so what I have found, again, just how story, if you have the objective in a story to say, okay, I'm going to make this clear thematic statement, this clear thematic argument, we're trying to get here. Therefore, if that is the goal, then doesn't it make the most sense to build something that is clear and as simple as possible without being too simplistic, right? You want to cover everything that needs to be covered. You want to look at this particular theme in all of the ways that you need to without making it convoluted or overly complex. But, and so you want to keep it as simple as possible, because just like in an essay or in a YouTube video, the goal is that someone watches my video and the video is so clear and so simple and so obvious that they're not missing the lesson that I'm trying to give to them, right?
Okay.
The same thing applies to writing a story, right? You want your story to be all encompassing on what you're trying to talk about, but you do that and you make it clear and simple so that people can understand it, right? I think there is this plague that exists in writing circles as well as in screenplays, where there is this love of complexity and there is this love of uniqueness or originality, in the sense that the story has to have three protagonists and we have to, tell everything through flashbacks, and we have to keep the audience in confusion about what's actually going on in the story until page 42, and everything is ambiguous in the beginning and there's no clarity. That to me is not helpful if you are basing your story off of a clear thematic argument and saying everything in my story must serve this clear thematic argument. My protagonist, what their goal is, what they believe, how they will go about getting that goal, the antagonists that they will come across, the mentors that they have, the fake allies, the fake opponents, all of these people, they are ultimately serving this larger purpose, which is the philosophical conflict at the center of my story and the final theme that my story is going to land on once we actually get to the climax and the story ends. And so I think that the simpler that you are able to make something while also covering everything that needs to be covered, the better that thing is. And I think it's Einstein who has a quote of, if you can't explain it to a 5-year-old, you don't understand it yourself. And that makes a lot of sense, right? Because it's like, you need to be able to break it down, because this is also a larger sort of meta element of writing and communication, which is all storytelling is communication, in the same way that language is, right? The reason that we have a story is because language is an incomplete method of communication, just like a story can be an incomplete method of communication. The reason we repeat story ideas, the reason that we repeat moral ideas, or all of these sorts of things, is because it's not so simple as just saying a few words and then everybody gets exactly what you're saying, right? It takes people to integrate something, a piece of information or a story, into themselves in a way where they understand it through their lens of reality, because all of us have our own experiences, all of us have our own lives. And then when we say words or we tell a story, we all have our own slightly varied representation of what that thing is, right? Like, if I said, yeah, like all of this comes down, if I said car to someone, right? Let's think about this, right? I say, think of a car, right? I might think of like a Toyota Camry. I might think of a pickup truck. I might think of a Ford F-150. Someone who lives in Italy, they're going to think of maybe a Fiat, right? Or something, like the cars designs are going to be different. The brands are going to be different in their head. This basic object is already going to be perceived by them. The thought that they're going to have is going to be different from the thought that you might have. Or if you said hotel room, or if you said, don't lie, right? All of this is based upon the fact that we're existing in this world using these communication tools that are not quite exact, right? And so because we're using tools that are not quite exact, and I cannot have your sensory experience of the world and you can't have mine, then what do we do with that? How do we overcome this divide between us? Through simplicity, through finding the things that we can make clear and using those to attach ourselves to each other so that we can actually transfer ideas, whether those are information and practical, like an essay or like a YouTube video essay, or whether those are more thematic or moral or philosophical, like you might find in a story. And so because of that, I think it's very important to maintain a level of simplicity, because the more simple you are able to make something while also not losing its fundamental pieces, the more people it's able to touch, and the more your message is able to go forward, right? You can even see this in all the way up to like politics. You'll see political figures, and people will say things like, oh, that politician talks at a fourth grade level, therefore their ideas are worse. Or it's like, well, to be able to simplify your speech and to be able to simplify your ideas can be a very, very, very powerful tool, because it means that you are able to speak to a larger number of people, right? If your focus is to only speak to people with PhDs, you are going to vastly cut down your influence than if you were able to speak to anyone who is willing to listen to you, right? And so if you are keeping the theme of your story as your focus and saying, this is the purpose of what I am doing, then there are a lot of decisions that you end up making, in my view, to serve that, simplicity being one of them.
That's amazingly put. I feel like the fact that that can be seen in so many fields, that can be seen in so many fields, and the fact that your communication has to be simple, because you have some of the greatest people who teach science. I remember having this great science teacher in high school. They could have explained the topic very complicated to the fact where they sound smart and they sound nice. Like many people I want to create complex stories that do this and do this and do this. But the fact that's more helpful is if you can explain to me simply, then that's the beauty of it. I feel like that was a really good point.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you are also able to build off of simple mental models that you can then build elements on top of that. If you're starting with something that you already don't quite understand, it's very hard to build elements on top of that. And stories are difficult, right? They're not simple.
Yeah.
That's why people struggle with them. It's not easy to create. And so if you are starting off by saying, okay, I'm entering this thing that's already difficult, so now let me wrap my hands behind my back and put a blindfold on, that's not going to make it easier to complete. It's you're making it much more likely that you give up halfway through or 30% of the way through, rather than starting with something more simple that gives you a longer runway to say, okay, this is going to have problems. This story I'm writing is going to have mistakes, but I'm starting myself off from a position where if I get into a bind, identifying what's not working becomes a lot easier because I'm not trying to do everything.
Got it. Let's see. Okay, so then my next question I have for you is, as a businessman and as a person who has a YouTube channel, as a teacher, but also as a writer, where do you find yourself taking the role of a leader?
Hmm. I mean, I would say I'm taking the role of a leader in my YouTube channel. I'm taking the role of a leader in people that I work with one-on-one. I'm also taking the role of a leader in people that join my course and go to I have a course where it's essentially like I talked about, getting your script done. That's kind of the
Yeah.
first focus. And then identifying your initial story problems and organizing them. That's kind of the second focus. And in that, we also do group calls like on Sundays. And so I would say that in those three arenas, I'm definitely being a leader, and people are asking me questions about story and how it operates. And I think that I have a responsibility to, one, give the best answers that I can, but also to continue my own learning process, right? And this is something that I am doing constantly. I'm doing my own writing consistently. And I really believe that if you are going to be a leader in some sort of thing, that it requires you to be continually studying that thing, right? And also with writing specifically, some people have asked me, like, hey, what other like screenwriting people do you look up to? Like, they're like, you know, people on
Yeah.
YouTube and these sorts of things. And there's some other channels that I really enjoy. You know, Just Write would be one of them. Lessons from the Screenplay is another fantastic
They're
channel
good.
specifically on writing. And I'll throw in my biggest one, which is Every Frame a Painting. That's actually the channel that inspired me to start my own YouTube channel. I remember watching one of his videos and I was like, this is the greatest YouTube channel I've ever seen in the world. And watched all of his videos that day. And so I think that I myself am always learning, trying to learn, okay, what is the next thing? What is unclear about my own writing right now? What am I missing? Right.
Mm.
And I think that also helps me teach, because I don't want people to inherit the flaws that I might have. And so I want to, as much as possible, find what those are and fix them before I end up, you know, passing them down to people that might be following me on YouTube.
Mm. And this kind of rolls into my next question. What do you believe makes a writer a professional?
Being paid, I would say. I mean,
Hey,
I think you can, um, like, ultimately, and this kind of comes into, like, writing and business are very, very different worlds. Like, I mean, we of course have a film industry and we have a book industry and we have industries for story, but the actual craft of those two things are completely separate, right? In a way where it becomes difficult sometimes to like bring those together. So I would say, like, to writers that are worried about whether or not they are professional, I think it's just like saying, what makes you a professional painter, to continue with the analogy, right? Like, was Van Gogh a professional painter? Like, he was not. Nobody liked his paintings while he was
yeah.
alive. I think like Edgar Allan Poe, I remember he was consistently struggling when he was alive as he was writing. Was he a professional writer? Maybe not, right? Maybe Van Gogh and Poe were not professional writers, but Van Gogh is one of the greatest painters of all time, and Edgar Allan Poe is one of the greatest writers of all time. So I think that there are fake goals sometimes. Like, I think if you're trying to be a writer, your focus should be being a writer and being very good at that thing. And if you also want to be a business person, then develop that side of you, because you can be many things. You don't have to just be one thing. There's a lot of different ways that you can attack industries and these larger elements. But I think if you're going to come into an art form and say, okay, how do I immediately become professional at this? I don't think that's the best angle. And I'm not saying that, like, don't make money or making money is bad. I'm the complete opposite on that. I think that whatever skill set you have, you should be figuring out how to make money with that skill set as fast as
Agreed.
humanly possible. I don't believe in like being a starving artist or like, please give me $2 for my and my donation or blah blah blah. Like, but what you have to understand is that most of the time, a story is not something that is perceived as a solution to a problem. Therefore, just like a painting is not perceived as a solution to a problem. Therefore, it's existing outside of this business world, right? Business is about solving problems, right? Of saying, okay, this person needs food, right? Okay, I'm going to create something that gives them food and they pay me money to give them food, right? And now we have a grocery store, right? Or this person needs transportation. Okay, well, now I'm going to sell them a car and now they have transportation, these sorts of things, right? So when you are entering into the how do I become a professional artistic person, I think when you do that, you need to say, okay, what is the industry that I would like to go into? And then who in that industry can I help? And what problem can I solve for a particular person that then sends me in a direction where I can ultimately make money doing the thing that I want to do. So I think the reason that so many artists as well as writers struggle to put these two things together is that they do not naturally fit, right? If
Got
you
it.
are a salesperson, then it makes a lot more sense how you get money, because you sell things to someone, you solve a problem for someone, and then they pay you, and you're clearly in the business world, right? But when you're not in this business world, when the thing that you're doing is not perceived as a solution to a problem, because like I said, I think a story is a solution to a problem in the sense that you are solving cultural problems, in the sense that you're saying, okay, what are the icons that people need to see? What are the valuable messages that I can give to people that are going to uplift them or help them or ultimately make a better world? So I do believe it is a solution to a problem, but that is not how people perceive it, right?
Mm.
And so you're dealing with this perception problem. Just like you can make the argument that a painting is a solution to a problem, right? That it's a solution to an aesthetic problem, right? But are people perceiving it in that way? No. And so it's something that you have to overcome, and it's something that you have to be honest about. And I don't think being focused on, okay, how do I consider myself a professional writer? That is a weird angle to take it. I would say you want to learn the skill set of writing and be very, very good at that, and then understand how you can apply that to people that you can help through the skill set that you have learned. And I think that's going to be the most valuable way to look at it, especially with artistic fields. A lot of it's going to be like, who do you know? Who do you know that can help you? And I think there's a lot of things that writers avoid. They have an idealistic view on the world, and that idealism hampers them. It hampers their growth in the sense that they say, well, I do great art, therefore
So
people should
people
pay
will
me
come
tons
to
of money
me.
for it. Right. And it's like, that's not necessarily how it works. And because that's not how it works, you can't say, oh, I wish people just changed their view on life. You have to say, okay, how do I actually adjust and to get what I want? Right.
Mm.
So yeah, I think idealism is definitely a killer in that sense. And so, how can you be of benefit to people rather than saying, well, I make really good art and that in and of itself should be enough, and people should just miraculously find me and give me loads of money because I am just the best. It's like, well, it's a little bit more complicated than that. So
Nice. And then one last question. It's on the topic of, it's a little bit similar to effective communication, but a little bit different. We call it information fluency, but it has to do with you personally learning information. But in your field, where do you find, learn, and incorporate new information? Where do you, even if you don't, even if they're talking about the past, where'd you go to know what you know?
hmm. So um I am so previously, I read a lot of books, but I think books are, they can be helpful, but a lot of times they can be slow, in the sense that what sometimes can be said in a 300-page book can be said in a 45-minute YouTube video, right? You find that a lot. So I would say, like, I have focused on finding books that, you know, everyone talks about in a particular field and reading those, like specifically screenwriting. But also I've read a lot of different business books because it's something I'm also very, very fascinated by. As you can kind of see from my YouTube channel and these sorts of things. And so that's something that I've read a lot of books about, but I'm also a big believer in listening to podcasts. I find a lot of information on YouTube. I think the internet is the most revolutionary information apparatus since the invention of the printing press. Like, I think the reason that we have all of these conversations about, like, is college worth it, right? That question comes because the internet is here now. That is the reason. If the internet did not exist, nobody would be asking, is college worth it, right? So all of this is happening because the internet is here. And so, like, now, a great example, a couple of days ago, I was listening to a podcast about the making of Pixar's Soul. And I was interested in, I think it was by Dolby, something like this. But it was with the director of the film, I believe, and one of the producers of the film. And so in this podcast, you are getting people who are in the absolute top of story development sitting and explaining their development process, right? Why would I not listen to that? And why would I listen to, you know, like, someone who is not so focused on the development process, or is not in this world, or this sort of thing, right? Or is not giving me that sort of helpful information? Or why would I you know, read a book from the 90s rather than listening to what the director of Soul is talking about on their development process? Now, there are some caveats to that, and of course, it's an hour-long podcast of people talking versus a specifically built out, you know, book of here's this idea and this idea and this idea and this idea. So there's some caveats to this, and I'm not saying don't read books, and I'm not saying, you know, college is completely useless and this sort of thing. But what I am saying is the majority of the information that I'm receiving because of the internet. And I'm consistently doing that every day. And I'm interested in other people's development processes, and I'm interested in people's overcoming, you know, writing problems. I also listen to a podcast about the creation of Peaky Blinders, and it was Stephen Knight, the writer creator of Peaky Blinders, and talking about what his inspiration was for the project, and the actual personal experience that he had with you know, people that had come back from World War I, and like what their experience was and how he integrated that into the show and all this sort of stuff. And so I think the internet is a great place to learn whatever it is that you are trying to learn. And I think that people that are taking full advantage of the educational side of the internet will massively lap people that are waiting for a college professor to give them an assignment before they get started.
Got it.
And I think that there, just as there's a ton of information on the internet, there's also a ton of entertainment, and that is awesome and fun, and also can be detrimental, right? If all you are doing is watching reaction videos and video game let's plays, and you have a particular lofty goal, and someone else has the same sort of lofty goal but is spending all of their time immersing themselves in educational materials on the same platform, then it's very likely that they are going to be ahead of you. And so I think that taking full advantage of the educational side of the internet is very important, and is, I believe, an extreme benefit, because now people in, let's say, Argentina now have access to information and a much wider apparatus of information than people who were going to Harvard Law in the 1980s, right? So you have a wealth of information that's available to you if you have even a mild internet connection, or even an unstable internet connection. And so I think that double down on that, like find what you are looking for is very likely on the internet. There's all sorts of fantastic educational materials out there. And like one good thing, if you're trying to learn screenwriting specifically, there's all sorts of screenplay PDFs on the internet. This is something that I have found that not everybody knows. So I'll just say, like, if you love a movie and you're like, oh man, I wonder what the script looks like, it is very likely that it's all on the internet. So type in that movie's name with script PDF, and either some sort of website has it, or some guy on Reddit uploaded it 7 years ago and you can download it for him.